Journalistic work which is able to focus but not to dilute, to investigate but not to hide, to differentiate but not to simplify, to enlighten but not to suppress, to inform but not just to entertain. So here we are, looking for new methods to finance our work. The simple question, how and who? With me on this panel are 4 distinguished colleagues with specific experiences in this topic. To my right, Ben Hicks, the Executive Director of the Guardian Foundation, an independent charity with a focus on journalism, education in the UK and internationally. Prior to that, Ben was responsible for grants and research with The Guardian. To my left, Virginia Pérez Alonso, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of El Mundo, and she is responsible to undertake the digital transformation as far as I understand the situation. Prior, she was with 20 Minutes in Spain in several functions. We have to mention that 20 Minutes is one of the very few papers still growing as print as digital. Far right, Murat Yetkin is Editor-in-Chief of Hürriyet Daily News, the oldest English language daily in Turkey. He's a veteran journalist working for a number of international media. And far to my left is Charlie Sennott, founder and executive director of GroundTruth project and co-founder of Global Post, and so to say not only a veteran journalist, but also, you may to say, a veteran participant of IPI congresses. So to start with, may I ask everybody to give a very short overview from her or his insights of the topic. I'd like to start with you, Ben, please.
Thank you, Markus. Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. And can I just say, as a non-journalist, the few non-journalists here, it's a real privilege to hear the stories of everyone. Yesterday, it's just humbling to hear the courage, just want to say thank you to start with. I thought with this particular session, my theory on these kinds of conversations is stick to what you know. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just The Guardian and our approach to sort of funding models, and particularly with philanthropy in mind. I think it's worth mentioning that the unique ownership of The Guardian. We are owned by the Scott Trust. It was set up in 1936 by the son of the recently departed editor, C.P. Scott. And the reason for setting up a trust structure was in order to sustain Guardian journalism in perpetuity, which means a really sustainable model. So even back then, we were thinking that the philanthropic model and a trust model was the way to think about sustaining journalism in the long term, and also to maintain independence. So The Guardian has never had, does not have a proprietor, does not have any shareholders. Nobody's ever going to make money out of The Guardian, which is such a powerful thing in this day and age, and the pressures on the market when it comes to journalism. So in terms of that's sort of a little bit of the history, and we still have that model. And as you probably most of you are aware, it's almost ironic that I'm speaking about funding for journalism in a week when last week The Guardian had to make such sort of severe cuts in the business. So, and on that topic, the business model. Traditionally, our income came from print sales, like most of your organizations, print sales, advertising, and sponsorship. That was the model. But because of the digital evolution, the social media revolution, we're having to completely rethink that model. And innovation is absolutely key. And I think, I'm here as the director of the Guardian Foundation. So, by the way, I'm not speaking for the Guardian on these things, and this is not about the future strategy of the Guardian. But I can freely say that the Guardian feels that the relationship with the reader through a membership model is absolutely key to sustaining the journalism in the future. So that will be sort of central to things. And also, the relationship with the corporate world, you know, the sponsorship model, the ways that you work with corporate partners has to change and evolve and find new ways of doing that, and I'd like to open that up to discussion a bit later as well. But philanthropy, working with foundations, we found, and this is talking from my own experience, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, we started working with the Gates Foundation because they were big fans of our global health coverage, and for the last 5 years, they've supported our development coverage. This has led on to us working with the Rockefeller Foundation and Ford around particular areas which are not so attractive perhaps to corporate sponsors. So human rights, environment, development, these are areas where the philanthropic model can be really powerful, and you can also keep that very thick red line of editorial independence when you work with these partners. And we've found it a very positive experience and have not ever felt sort of pressured or felt that there was a sort of a donor-led culture in that way at all. However, it does mean with this new way of thinking with philanthropy for media organizations, measuring impact, as the NGO world, the charity world has had to do from forever, journalists are having to start to think about how they measure their impact and what that means and what that looks like. And I think, for me, that's a real key to understanding how that can become sustainable in the long term. So what I mean by that is, what is impact? When you tell a story, has it changed policy? Has it changed corporate behavior? Has it educated public across the world? How many people are you reaching with your stories? I always talk too much. I will leave it there, but thanks for having me, and looking forward to this conversation and hearing the views of the audience.
Thanks very much, Ben. Well, I will try to grill you afterwards concerning the sustainability of this model. May I pass to you, Virginia, please?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for being here at such an hour in the morning. Well, I'm going to try to explain you what is the situation in Spain after this crisis that is not passed yet. The actual revenue models for media in Spain are a direct consequence from this economic crisis. This is a quick summary of the situation. Before crisis, all media were focused on print, and digital was only a satellite. They barely innovated. Print revenues and circulation fell dramatically. All media had serious financial problems, and some of the main newspapers have now big brands or advertisers on their boards. Meanwhile, a bubble of political corruption exploded, and at the same time, big media were perceived, and still are perceived, as a part of the establishment. This had some big consequences for media. One of them was lack of credibility of this traditional media, a reputation crisis, and this is extensive to the politics. And actually, we have, last December, we had general elections, and we had 2 new parties that are now seated on the parliament, which is a reflect of the, this deception of the citizenship. What is happening now to the media? Okay, they are focusing more on digital, not only on digital journalism, but on digital revenues and how to get them. But still they have a great dependence on advertisement, and most revenues still come from print. So they are trying to raise the subscription, but it's subscription to print, but to print online. I mean, you can go through the pages online and read the newspaper, but that is what they are doing now. Meanwhile, some new media we saw the birth of new media, small media, native online media, ideological media, with new funding models, and some of them now, 2 years later, are sustainable. So we can summarize these models in 4. I'm going to go very quickly through them. The first one would be a freemium plus advertising plus political affinity plus a subscription model. That would be one of them that is working very, very good in Spain. Second one would be crowdfunding plus subscription, paid subscription, freemium plus advertising. This is going so-so. Third one would be paid subscription. I mean, if you pay, you read. If you don't pay, you don't read at all. And this doesn't work. And a fourth one would be a cooperate. A company between funders and members of the newsroom. So they discuss what they are going to publish. And we have one newspaper like this, and this is working quite good. So I think that further we can go more on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Virginia. May I pass now to you, Murat, to
Sure.
Turkey, which I think the situation is especially difficult for media.
Thank you, Markus. Good morning. I'm glad to be here with you this morning. I believe there are two main constraints on quality journalism in today's world. One of them is the financial constraints, as we are trying to overcome with different models. Those are mainly due to digital transformation and changing of the reader or viewer profile, which put pressure on revenues, which means shrinking newsrooms, lesser number of reporters, editors, producers. That's a decrease in quality journalism, the quality of journalism. Second is the environmental, I call, constraints. That's political and social ones. Those are mainly due to the changing political environment, due to rising terrorism, lesser tolerance, more regulations and limitations on media, including digital, direct and indirect pressures and decrease of quality of democracy at local and global levels. As a newspaper and media group which was subject to physical and other forms of pressures in 2015, last year, in a country, in Turkey, amid regional conflicts and domestic rising problems regarding security and democracy, there might be a number of issues which could be said in that manner. To be a journalist in Turkey nowadays is not the easiest job around. But the focus of this panel is about the financial constraints and quality of journalism and how to overcome it through funding. So let's focus on that. I have all the details, but my time is limited now. But I might say that Hürriyet is mainly working on the classical model and trying to improve that for more revenues, still being a profitable paper. And a bit of good news for now that print is not dead in Turkey, though not in very good condition. So we're trying to improve both print and digital at the same time as a part of our transformation planning.
Okay, thanks very much, Murat. We will dig in afterwards concerning also the topic of profitability of the newspaper itself and the media company.
We can still maintain that and trying to improve.
Very good. So last but not least, Charlie, you're the co-founder of Global Post and the founder of GroundTruth project. That's correct. So there is a slight difference between these two projects. Can you elaborate that a little bit for us?
Sure. Thank you, Markus. Good morning, everyone. I will get to those differences, but I wanted to start off with the very broad framing of the whole conference, journalism at risk. And I wanted to say there is no greater risk to this craft that we love than our existence. And I really think that is what's at stake right now, that we have to come up with sustainable models at a time of great change, tumult, opportunity, really a revolutionary moment. And I think one of the greatest challenges in front of us as a business, as an enterprise, as a craft, as a calling, is that we have to figure out the new business models. The old ones, as Markus has pointed out, are collapsing. And I want to tie the risk that we face financially to the risk we face in the field, because they are connected. If you don't have sufficient resources as a news organization and you're putting people out covering the most dangerous assignments in the world, you're putting them at peril because they need resources to operate safely. So I think there is a connection here between journalism at risk and the financial peril we face, but also the physical dangers and the resources we'll need to confront them. To answer Markus's question, Global Post, which I co-founded in 2008, we launched in January of 2009, was a for-profit model, and I'll discuss that. The GroundTruth project, which I launched about 3 years ago, is a non-profit model. And my journey as an entrepreneur from for-profit to non-profit, I think is a telling one, and one that I hope can inspire some conversation. I wanted to start, just if I have a minute here, Markus, I know you're gonna give me the high sign if I go over, but I do want to just tell a quick story about my journey from the good old days of classic earning models, as Markus described them. I really came of age thinking of journalism as heroic. I grew up in the era of Watergate and Woodward and Bernstein, and thinking about journalism as something I wanted to do from the time I was about 12 or 13. Great passion and a great future ahead. So, like many people from my generation, I had a lot of opportunity. I started at a small newspaper. I eventually worked my way up and got to the New York Daily News. The New York Daily News, I covered cops and courts, stumbled into a pretty big crime story, which was the first bombing of the World Trade Center, which led me to a path to investigate what we would now look upon as nascent Al-Qaeda. And that led me to the Boston Globe, where I became a foreign correspondent and the Middle East bureau chief, and continued on that path of researching that story about Islamic extremism and militancy and its ferment in the Middle East. And the story just went on from there, where I continued after 9/11 to report on the Middle East, was based there for many years for the Boston Globe, eventually became the London bureau chief, but all through that time did many years of reporting in Afghanistan, in Iraq, throughout the region. Lost a lot of friends along the way in that time. There were many of my colleagues who were killed on assignment or who died on assignment. And it was a very dramatic and searing time. And I ended up, after all those years of doing all that foreign reporting, at a paper I loved, the Boston Globe, which is my hometown, Boston. I realized that not only did I need a year off, but I wanted to step back and really think. So I don't know how many of you have heard of the Nieman Fellowship, but it is a great year for recovering conflict correspondents who are completely burned out. And I have my wife, and we have 4 boys, all of whom were born on assignment. And we ended up regrouping back in Boston, back in Cambridge, at Harvard, for this fellowship. And it gave me a year to think. And during that year, I really thought about the changing business models, the collapse of that newspaper industry that I really loved. And it was at that point I realized I really want to start something. I want to be an entrepreneur. So to make a pretty long story short, the idea came for Global Post. We brought together some funders in Boston. We had pretty good capitalization, and we set off on a course to begin a new kind of international news organization that would be America's first fully online international news organization. We built a network of 75 correspondents in 50 countries, and the team that we assembled was extraordinary and went on to win a lot of awards. It went on to win the Polk, the Peabody, an Emmy. It was really an extraordinary time and team that we built. I was very proud of the work we did editorially, but as a business, we struggled greatly. The challenges were much bigger than we realized. To make a for-profit model work through online advertising revenue. So how were we going to bring down enough banner ads to sustain quality journalism around the world? It took me about 3 years to realize this is not going to work. That where we were in our earnings was nowhere near where we needed to be. And one of the ideas that I had early on was, what if we went nonprofit? What if we went to the models that I saw at National Public Radio, at PBS, where they're really doing quality journalism on a nonprofit basis? Could we play a role there as a digital player as opposed to classical broadcast, which is mostly what PBS is? And we started to go down that road, and the Ford Foundation gave us our first grant, and that was soon followed by the Luce Foundation, then the Kaiser Foundation. And we realized that we were very quickly, through this little nascent idea called the GroundTruth Project, we were bringing in more revenue than we were through advertising. So foundation support was surpassing advertising. And at that point, we broke off, and I created the GroundTruth Project as a nonprofit. And we moved it across town to WGBH, which is the flagship PBS station, I would say, in America. Produces PBS Frontline. It produces Nova. It's where PRI The World is based. A really strong home for us to partner. And we began to do that. And what we do at the GroundTruth Project is fulfill two things. One is we're trying to offer opportunity to young journalists who are really in a tough place. There are many young freelancers who I've met in starting Global Post and who I knew from the field who were really struggling with this economy. They can't make it work to do the kind of journalism they should be doing with the kind of rates classic news organizations are paying them. So how could we fill a gap there and offer them some support, offer them training, really focus on safety, and make sure that we understood how we could inspire them and support them in the field. And we give about 30 fellowships a year that range between 1 month and a full year to do a project. We often go and set up in countries. We've set up in Egypt, where we covered the revolution in 2011. We also were in Burma, where we covered an emerging democracy. We usually go with about 3 or 4 editors. We build a team of, say, 20, and we try to combine American young journalists with journalists from the country we're covering in equal measure and create a strong team that way. To make, this is a long story. I'm going to end it here and just say that the GroundTruth Project found great success from the nonprofit model. Global Post continued to struggle, but what has happened very recently in the last 6 months is that Global Post has now, by the decision of its board, shifted to the nonprofit model as well. And Global Post has come over and been folded into Public Radio International, which is based at WGBH. So now Global Post and the GroundTruth Project are both at WGBH. And really, I think going forward now, continuing to do quality journalism, but changing the funding model to rely on foundation support, individual support, and where possible, revenue streams. Because being a nonprofit doesn't mean you can't have profit. What it means is the profit you make will go back into sustain the enterprise of doing the quality journalism. And I think that is a very important model for the future, not the only model. And I deeply believe in commerce and business and self-sustaining. But I think we need to think about these nonprofit models to do quality journalism, particularly in this moment in time.
Okay, thanks very much, Charlie, for these insights. Let me go back to you, Ben. We heard that your trust is based on philanthropy, of funding with a non-profit attitude, as far as I understand the situation. How does it come that The Guardian has to cut costs then?
I mean, the endowment, so the core funding for The Guardian is from a long-term endowment from a trust. That doesn't mean that the everyday running of the business has to be a self-creating model. It has to be self-financing. So there is a crisis for the business model of journalism across the world. I don't think anyone is immune to that. I think you see it particularly in the UK at the moment. The Independent has had to make significant cuts. It tends to be hitting the liberal media particularly hard. I think it's really a case of there are sort of 2 or 3 factors that have really changed the game completely. One is that news organizations have lost control of distribution. The social media revolution, and I think it is a revolution, means that the power is with the tech giants, so Facebook, Google, it really is absolutely key that news organizations are working closely with these companies to make because it's an evolving market, and if news organizations don't rethink how the distribution channel works, then it's not going to survive. I mean, it really is a time to act.
Okay. Virginia, you described 4 models, when I get it correctly. Is it wrong to say none of them is really working?
Broken?
None is really working of these 4 models you mentioned before?
All are working.
All are working?
Yeah.
So you have all as a sustainable model for refinancing El Mundo's
No,
cost.
it's not for El Mundo. I mean, they are
Okay.
besides El Mundo. So these are new media that were born
But how is the situation in El Mundo?
In El Mundo, I mean, El Mundo is a traditional media. It's a newspaper, printed newspaper, and now it used to be the leader in digital. Now it's the second one, but we're getting the first one. And now we're focusing on digital. Mm-hmm. And we've managed to compensate the losses from print in digital. Okay, so the volume of growing in digital revenue is the same now as the loss of in print. That's it. So that's
and is it
point.
based on ad revenue or on subscription, on
both.
digital subscription? Okay.
On both, yeah.
So in a way, that's an optimistic outlook.
Well, I think it's a way. I mean, we are on path. We set the path, and we'll see next year. But I mean, we're very ambitious in that way. We want to grow a lot more on digital.
Murat, you mentioned that in your market, print is still not king, but it's still working. How is the financial situation of Hürriyet?
Financial situation of Hürriyet is not bad. We still make profit, but that doesn't apply to the entire Turkish media. Let me give a bit facts and figures so that it could be understood that classical model can still work with certain improvements and with a transformation from print to digital or that process. Despite the problems that I mentioned for the last year, we, as Hürriyet newspaper, managed to continue our transformation project and our position to be a profitable newspaper still. Print market in Turkey is shrinking by 10% every year. This is huge. In order to overcome that problem, a number of newspapers, mostly the ones with lesser popularity, but despite sources from other sources than journalism and sales, focus on free distribution in bulk amounts in order to maintain their circulation figures. That is why the losses in print appear lesser on paper than actual losses. So quality reach of papers, that is, to readers still in search of quality content, quality news, decreases. Now it is around 2 million in a country of 77 million population, which has its main news source as TV, popular TV channels. Popular TV channels is the main news source of people in Turkey. Despite this depressing outlook, Hürriyet managed to increase its share in the market in 2015 with an average daily circulation of 359,000 copies per day. Average reach of Hürriyet is 4. That is, every copy is on average read by 4 people. This is high because it is read in social places too, in coffee houses, in schools, etc. So we assume that the daily reach of Hürriyet is 1.2, 1.4 million readers in print. In digital, average number of readers per day is around 3 million. This is good. This is a good figure. Therefore, we can assume that Hürriyet content has a total reach of 4 million readers or viewers in print and digital combined. This picture is partly due to successful management of stock out, which was down by 15% last year, stock out and return rates. So we managed them very well. We focused on them and managed to decrease stock out. And steps taken for better quality content, news-wise and other kind of content production. Sorry. On the revenue side, 66% of our 406 million Turkish lira of print revenues were from advertisement. So we'll still, that's why I'm insisting that we still keep on the classical model. But this is for Turkey. This may not be valid for the United States or Britain, but that's valid for a few minutes more, Markus. Our 2016 target is 4 million, slightly lower than next year, but that's under control, which we can succeed. In digital, there was a rise in revenues in 2015 by 24%. In this year, we target a 36% rise to 103 million TL. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization is also, we maintain our positions. This is good. We started to earn more in digital, though not enough to compensate losses in print. But in print is not that still, as I told you. Since we try to manage our transformation by maintaining our profitability, we know that we must invest and improvise quality journalism as well, in addition to business development and brand management dimensions. Brand management is particularly very important in that. I'm going to give some figures on that too. In order to contribute that, we established a special assignment unit, for example, within our newsroom. What does that mean? We brought together a number of reporters, mainly senior reporters, formed this unit to focus on special files, off-the-beat stories, the kinds that Charlie had mentioned, had mentioned, other than routine stories, which in Turkey we are not, unfortunately, in deprivation of, and with lots of big things happening, but despite that, we form a special assignment unit for particular files. The purpose here is to make a difference in content than other papers, increase competition through presenting better news and other quality content for our readers and viewers. We observe that the readers are responding to that positively. Where do we understand that? Not only increase in sales in those days with better content, but according to a recent German Marshall Fund survey, Hürriyet is the most influential paper in the country, keeping in mind the direct and indirect pressures on us. It is the most read paper among the main opposition party supporters, but the third rank among the ruling party supporters and other opposition parties. Our nearest competitor being Posta newspaper, also a part of Doğan Media Group, which Hürriyet belongs, and Hürriyet Daily News, I edit also. This is the general picture that we live in.
Okay.
How we survive.
Okay. I'm a little bit puzzled now. So I have a Hürriyet model working, more or less. I have the El Mundo, promises a good new world. Digital will compensate the losses of print. I heard you, Charlie, saying we need to invent a new model, and as far as I understand, you're going to non-profit as a model, and I have you, Ben, with, in a way, Guardian, as I told you yesterday, it's the, in a way, the role model for all quality-orientated journalists to see or to look at the Guardian with a lot of investment in quality journalism, and nevertheless, you have a lot of losses during the last few years, and in a way, there is this trust covering, obviously, all these losses. So my question what will happen? I mean, is this a sustainable model for everybody of you?
Can I come on that?
Please, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a, you know, back to my point about the tech giants. It's a new world. The readers' behavior has completely changed. So the majority of people reading The Guardian are now reading it on their mobile phones. It requires a rethink of the whole business model for the industry, not just for The Guardian. Philanthropy, and as Charlie says, for us, that's been something of a revelation over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, to realize there are these foundations, private donors, who their whole philosophy is around freedom of expression, shining a light on human rights. So there is a sort of a new pillar that's emerging for us, and I think it's much more, as Charlie mentioned to me before this session, it's much more, there's much more opportunity in the US to do this because of the culture of philanthropy there. But I mean, a really good example, you know, we happen to be in Qatar. We sort of 2 or 3 years ago, we were writing an awful lot about modern day slavery, and it was across the newspaper. And we made links with a foundation called Humanity United, who are committed to human freedom. And they gave us a grant specifically to spend on investigative journalism around the topic of modern-day slavery. Now, this is a good example of where that's the hardest bit of the business to fund in a way, because it's so expensive, because it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resource. And we had this fund to spend as we wished. The funder was completely hands-off on this topic. It meant that the story you might have seen in The Guardian over the last few years around the building of the World Cup stadiums here in Qatar, Nepalese migrant workers, that story was enabled by philanthropic funding. We wouldn't have been able to do that story without foundation funding. In the same way as we did the same as another story about Thai fishing. Now those did change an agenda. Those did have real impact. So that relationship between the role of philanthropy and impact journalism is a sort of a new world, if you like, for The Guardian, and I think a model that is really exciting.
But is it a model only fit for project-orientated journalism? Is it also suitable to, let's say, refinance big structures we had in the past?
Can I jump in on that? Because I think there's a landscape that you really do have to understand is different in America than it is in Europe and than it is in elsewhere in the world. And it's very hard to generalize and to say what will work has some universal truth. But I do think the American landscape is uniquely barren of international news, quality international news. There are great exceptions. New York Times, I think, most days does a very good job covering the world. National Public Radio does a great job. But other big traditional newspapers and networks, they've really cut their foreign reporting a lot. And I think we live in a time where we need to understand the world. And I think on the American landscape in particular, this I would say is not true as much in Europe, but it's definitely true in the American landscape. There is a need for public support for the public mission of explaining the world to the American people, because it's not happening in the commercial model as well as it should. There are great exceptions. There are fantastic international reporters in many US media. But as a whole, compared to, say, the British market, French markets, other places in the world, we don't do well. We're not covering the world well. So in the United States in particular, that culture of philanthropy has become critical to sustaining operations that can cover the world that way. And if you think about those organizations that do it well in America, I would say National Public Radio, which is a nonprofit, public-funded model. They rely on the support of people. They rely on a small bit of funding from the government and a large bit of funding from individual donors and foundations. The other one is PBS, the NewsHour, who we partner with, and Frontline, who we partner with. Frontline is a documentary unit, so project-based, but NewsHour is a daily news program, a broadcast. I think there are models for daily as well as special projects, in-depth projects. But I think what's our unique value added at the GroundTruth project is what we're saying is we see a need for inspiring young journalists. And I'll tell you why. Because all of these models need to be rethought, as Ben was saying. And to rethink them, you need young entrepreneurs who are going to create the new businesses for the future. So how do we take these journalists and really inspire them to keep covering the world, keep learning about their craft, keep at it, basically keep them in a survival mode at least, if not try to offer them greater opportunity than that, because they are the future, they're how we're going to figure this out. So GroundTruth is trying to fulfill the need to provide emerging journalists, as we call them, not students. These are journalists with a few years' experience. We're trying to provide them an opportunity, and then we're trying to fulfill another need, which is the need for quality, in-depth content by organizations that are having a hard time paying for it. So we take the work that these young journalists produce that we fund, and we distribute it through our editorial partnerships, largely with PBS, through Public Radio International or through PBS NewsHour. We've done 2 front lines. We hope to do more. And we also have print partners, Atlantic, Foreign Policy. So I think GroundTruth I think of as this place in the middle, almost an attempt to try to just hold on until we figure out the new models that will be entrepreneurial. Some will be publicly funded. And I do think that there will be commercial models that will sustain, but we have not yet arrived on it.
Okay. I will give the audience the chance to ask questions in a few seconds, but first, do we have to change, or what is first? Is the funder first, or is the journalism first? So my question is, do we have to change our journalistic work?
The journalism has to be first. And if it's not, it's not a good funder.
But in reality, what governs? And I mean, we all live in more or less capitalistic world. So usually the money is the boss. The boss. But how is it in Spain? How is it with you?
Difference is between new media and old media. I mean, when you have a traditional media, you have the structure in front of you, and it is very difficult to change that because you want to keep doing the same journalism as you did before. So there comes a challenge because in some moment you have to choose, and you have to reduce the coverages that you are doing. When you are building a new media, you can grow from zero, okay? So you can scale the growing and make a plan and say, okay, now we are born with 10 journalism and we're going to do these projects. If next year we get the revenues we need, in whichever, we can be 15, and we can do details, you know, and with transparency, if you tell your readers that that is your plan, you can be sustainable. I mean, but you cannot be covering the world.
Okay. So, who has
Markus, can I add one thing? I think one sentence.
Yeah.
I think we need to put journalism first, because otherwise, I mean, if you put journalism first, you can always find different models of funding. But if you forget about journalism, you forget about everything. That's why we are here.
Yeah. I would add great support to that, because I don't think it's hard to understand. You raise a really good question, Markus, about the money talks. But good funders, foundations with a tradition of philanthropy, the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Luce Foundation, these foundations understand that what they're doing is offering you the opportunity to tell the stories that matter. And the good funders get out of the way and allow you to do that. And if you don't keep the journalism first, you'll chase bad funding and you will very quickly lose the good funding. So it's an ecosystem that's pretty sophisticated in the United States about funders and about foundations. There are challenges to it, and you have to be brave enough to hold the line, but that's true in the commercial funding model as well.
It is. So who has a question? Galina, please, and then Mr. Ravi here in front, and then, okay, sorry, the mic was, okay. There's no mic?
Hello? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
perfect.
So my question is for those of you who work with news organizations. First of all, I hate to belabor this point, but so much content is being produced by freelancers. Number one, do you use freelance work? Number two, what's your freelance rate? And do you feel like that's enough for your freelancers to sustain a living?
Murat?
Very shortly, personally, I do not use freelance contributors, mainly because of some legal consequences, possible legal consequences of it. I'd like to have my own reporters and editors working on certain projects. So I'm a bit distant to use of freelance workforce.
I would just add, I know Salome's done amazing work as a freelancer. The freelance talent that is out there is extraordinary, and it needs opportunity. At Global Post, we had a transformation over time. We started with a sort of confederacy of freelancers around the world. We then crystallized into 5 or 6 full-time senior correspondents with other freelancers around them. And I don't feel like that model sustained well. I don't think we could keep it up. We couldn't provide a fair living to some of these correspondents because we were not taking off as a business enough. If it had engaged, maybe we could have done it, but it didn't. GroundTruth is really, comes out of, in part, a recognition of that. That maybe what we need to do is step back and find a way to use foundation support and individual support to provide opportunity to these younger freelancers, typically freelancers in the field, although we have worked with some staffers at organizations that couldn't afford to put them out in the field and then give them the funding to do that. But most of the people we work with are freelancers, and I just can't tell you the talent that's out there is extraordinary, but the support they need is enormous. So I hope GroundTruth plays a small role in trying to support freelancers, but it's not a model that relies on profiting off of them as much as it is trying to provide the support for a new generation of correspondents to tell the most important stories of their generation.
Okay, thank you. Galina, please.
Galina Sidorova, Foundation for Investigative Journalism, Russia, and also a member of the IPI Executive Board. Charles, I remember so well, I think it was 2009 when you presented your project, and the Global Post project, and to me it seemed really something very inspiring, the way you started your work and your belief that it could be not only really important for journalism, for the development of journalism, but also for as a commercial project.
Yeah.
So now it seems that it is not so good a commercial project. So what do you think now? Is it at all possible to use this profit model for quality journalism? And probably can you just develop on what were the problems you confronted? Why you haven't succeeded? And also other question is, did you at all try to use the model when your readers, your audience pay for the contents?
Okay,
Especially, I know that you are online project, so some...
Two very good questions from Galina. Be shorter than the
Okay.
questions are, please.
I've
Can you
learned-
pass the mic to Mr. Rami? Thank you. Yeah, Charlie.
To answer your question, I would say I've learned a lot since 2009 when we launched. It has been an incredible ride as an entrepreneur. I mean, I am a field correspondent, right? I am a foreign correspondent, not a businessman. But I have a great passion for what we do and a great, I think, leaning toward being an entrepreneur. And it is an entrepreneurial moment. And you have to keep trying. And one of the things I've learned as an entrepreneur is that if you haven't had a failure, then you're not going to really ever have a big success. You have to keep experimenting with models. You have to keep pushing forward. This is a culture that is alive and kicking among a lot of young people. And it's why I have so much faith that they're going to be the ones who will figure it out, not us. not people like me who have sort of a foot in those wonderful traditional days of journalism. I think it's going to come from those who really are digital natives, who understand where this needs to go. And I'm hoping for them to start more and more their own businesses and push forward on those. Basically, is there a sustainable model? Yes. Global Post, remember, didn't go away. It's now just been folded into a nonprofit, Public Radio International. It doesn't mean you stop earning revenue. You can still bring revenue in. It's just that it's not going to create profit for shareholders. It's just going to be money that will go back in to sustain the enterprise. That's a really important concept to understand.
Okay. Mr. Ravi, please.
Thank you, Markus. I'm N. Ravi, former editor-in-chief and now director of the Hindu newspaper from India. In India, we still see circulation numbers and advertising revenues growing, but it's a matter of time before the good times come to an end, and we are looking for models to sustain journalism elsewhere where crisis has hit. And I find that most models operate on the assumption that journalism as such would be commercially unviable because advertisers don't find it attractive enough and the readers are unwilling to pay the full price. And all models seem to work around this problem either by media companies diversifying into other areas such as education publishing or becoming curiosities and collectibles of people with money to lose, or at times, or going into non-profit modes. I was wondering, is there any model that could make journalism as we know by itself viable? Because if you go by even the non-profit model, you go by the agenda set by other people, even if it be the most virtuous of agendas. So I was wondering whether the credibility of journalism itself would be at stake if we go into other models.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi. Who wants to ask Ben, maybe?
Yeah, we're at such an interesting time in global journalism, and it really, I feel like I'm laboring a point, but it needs a complete rethink of all the models. And it doesn't, and as Charlie says, it's not about saying philanthropy is the answer or, a new kind of ad model is the answer. I actually, and this is a personal view, I actually think it's about monetizing that engagement with the reader and listening to readers. So building loyalty, in all businesses, this is what people need to do. Building loyalty with a reader and building loyalty with a brand of your news organization means that from there you need to find ways to grow revenue from that. Now, whether that is through, as The Guardian is, we're very invested in a membership scheme, so people becoming a member of The Guardian, associating with the brand, feeling part of a movement, if you like, for me, that feels right, and it feels very much in tune with the use of social media and new technologies. And so the concept of a media house living as a business in isolation, trying to sell a product is, in a way, that is almost yesterday's model, I personally feel. And that the more, and as Charlie says, the entrepreneurs, the young people, who are coming up with these new ideas, new ways of looking at the world is changing so quickly that if our more traditional media houses don't pay attention, and you look at the Vices of this world and the BuzzFeeds and how quickly they're moving with innovations, we really need to pay attention because, okay, maybe for the next 5-10 years, these traditional models are still going to work, but very soon we need to move quickly and think very differently about how distribution of news is working.
I might just quickly add...
Sorry, Charlie.
Just one quick thing. Washington Post, look at their model, how it combines for-profit and non-profit.
Okay. Mario.
Mario, yeah. Hello, I'm Mario. I'm from a startup called Content Insights. I have a question especially for sir from Hürriyet and lady from...
El Mundo.
Yes, El Mundo. We are year after year after year, we are seeing a tremendous decline in print and rise of the digital. And one of the models that has proven, as Sir from The Guardian says, is paywall. And what are your thoughts about paywall, and what should be like the main points for charging your readers to read content? And could be this a way to fund quality journalism, to make readers pay for quality journalism?
Okay. Murat, first.
Our paper also looked into the opportunities of paywall, and for now we dropped it because we found out that the investment we are going to make for paywall will not compensate the expected revenues. Paywall system works for English and for mainly American audience because of the consumption habits of people. In some countries, people are used to pay for the content, and in some countries, they're not. So it's not a universal rule, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Virginia?
I totally agree. It depends on your society. I mean, in Spain, people is not very keen to pay. There have been some paywall models. They have not worked. I'm more on the idea of a freemium model more than a paywall. I mean, you pay, you can take a look for free for a lot of content, and then you pay for some content. And for example, when you mentioned the Washington Post model, that's a good one. I mean, what they are trying to do is have the more readers they can, and they think that at the end, there will be this 3%, 4%, 5% that will pay for being part of Washington Post, and I think that's an intelligent way.
Okay, last question from Simon Lee, please. The mic is there. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Simon Lee, retired assistant managing editor of the Los Angeles Times, and in retirement, I've become associated with a very small startup, 11 staffers, called Inside Climate News, which specializes in environmental issues and climate issues, investigative journalism. It receives funding from foundations. I think we all agree that credibility is essential in journalism. And as we do investigative journalism, we are finding that those we investigate are attacking us on the basis that foundations like the Ford Foundation, like the Rockefeller Foundation, are known to be biased against carbon industries, for instance.
How ironic, Ford biased against
yes.
carbon.
And their attack point is that we receive money from these foundations, therefore the journalism we produce is biased in favor of their perceived biases. Is this I mean, in a highly politicized world on a controversial topic, strange though that may seem, that climate change should be controversial.
Markus, could
Is this a vulnerability, or is it something just to be shrugged off?
No, very good question, Simon, for the very rest of the time. Sorry, we ran out of time. Very short answers. Very short answers, Charlie first, and then I would like to address you, Ben, again. Conflict of interest, that's the topic.
Simon, I would actually in the wings here, love to hear your thoughts on this, but honestly, traditional media, which went after commercial advertising, we have to admit, was often beholden to the interests of commercial advertising. And good newspapers learned to build a wall between the journalism and the business side. It's just as important for nonprofit news organizations to maintain that wall between the funding we receive from the foundations and the individuals who will support our work and our own editorial integrity. And the good organizations will have that wall, and I think the good funders understand the importance of that wall.
Ben, can you specify how The Guardian is working with this issue?
Yeah, I mean, very, very briefly. We work with the Gates Foundation. We regularly write articles that are highly critical of the Gates Foundation. Transparency, I think, is my one-word answer to that. We have a a big logo of the foundation that is supporting any journalism that it is, which appears next to the article. So you click on that and it tells you what the relationship is and how the editorial content is completely independent. The line could not be thicker between, that's the first conversation we have with any funding relationship. Also, multiple funders. The key is not to have one funder that's I think this is a very different story if you're a smaller organization, and it's a bigger problem in a sense because you are beholden. But for the larger media houses, I think the plurality of funding is a very important one as well, because then those questions become easy to answer.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to leave it here. I was instructed to be precisely with 10 o'clock. It's roughly 8 minutes late. I'm sorry, I'm a Swiss. Usually I'm punctual. Enjoy the break. Thank you very much.
Thank you.